So we'll be starting with folks in government, and I'll let you know what our upcoming events will be in the next months as well. I just want to give some housekeeping logistical things. So in terms of the recording has started. Where we'll be hosting it, I will let you know, but it will be kept. I'll let you know where it will be hosted. We anticipate, I have a few curated questions where our panelists get to talk a little bit about their journeys, but really this conversation is for you all. So I really hope that you have questions and you get to talk about what you'd like to learn. And depending on how things go, we'd love to go into breakout rooms so folks can get more personal and really get into the meat of the content to learn about everyone's journey. I will not do specific and detailed introductions because that is part of the questions we'll be going into. So I'll get into that. Are there any logistical questions before I dive right in? Okay. So again, welcome. This is brought to you with a combination of Aspen, which is a new program funded by the Office of the Provost that supports social and behavioral doctoral students at the School of Public Health and really all across the university in pursuing non-academic careers essentially. And then the Career Services and the Office of Alumni Relations. So have with us are Doctors Christiansen, Haste, and Jane. And I will start off with my first question to each of them. So if y'all can, take it as you go. If you could just share with us briefly, again, correct pronunciation of your name, if I mispronounced it in any way, which is very possible. Your pronouns, the department you had while you were here at BSPH, your current, just kind of how you got into that role. So a little bit of brief background would be wonderful to hear from you all. And I will go on mute so we can hear you, and I will stop sharing so we can see you.
I guess I can begin unless you in a particular order, but I just wanted to say it's really wonderful to be here with all of you this afternoon. Thanks so much for having me, Anushka. I'm really excited to be here. So my name is Kriti Jain, and the department that I graduated from was Health, Behavior, and Society. I finished a PhD there in 2018. And I also have an MSPH from International Health, also from BSPH from 2011. So, and my current role is a social science research analyst, which really is two things. One is somebody who does a lot of federal government processes, awarding and overseeing contracts, things like that, just general project management, keeping things running on time. And the second is designing research projects, reviewing analysis plans, and really overseeing research. And I think one half of it is, all of the federal processes are things that I had to learn once I got into the job. And everything else, the research, oversight of research is something that I, learned through my time at Hopkins, previous research jobs, and, continue to learn and continue to try to keep those skills sharp. So I did not mention my pronouns, which are she, her, and hers. And I also wanted to just briefly talk about how I got here. So, this was where I am now at the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, which is at the Administration for Children and Families. The Administration for Children and Families administers a lot of U.S. social safety net programs like LIHEAP, grants for keeping heat on in the winter for families with low incomes. So the role of my office within the Administration for Children and Families is to serve as an evaluator for those programs. And the way I got there was really right after finishing my doctorate in HBS. It was the job that I applied to. I started as a contractor, and then I became a civil servant who was directly employed by the federal government. So I can talk a little bit about that later, and some of the curated questions suggested by Anushka. But yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing Marissa and Karina, your backgrounds as well.
Sure, I can go ahead. It's Marissa Hast for the pronunciation for my name. And I am the lead epidemiologist in the child and adolescent HIV team in my division. And I'm also an officer in the US Public Health Service, hence the uniform. So I'd be happy to talk about that. It's a totally different thing than being in civil service. And I got to my current role when I graduated. I was actually in the epidemiology department at Hopkins, and leading up to my defense, I applied to Epidemic Intelligence Service, or EIS. And that's how I got in. And I knew about this program because I had done my master's at Emory and had worked as a student at CDC already. And so I was aware of this program, aware of the Commission Corps, and applied. Oh, and after my master's, I worked as a contractor for 2 years at CDC. So I sort of already knew when I went back to school that I wanted to come to the government and I wanted to come back to CDC. And this was originally where I was aiming and why I got my PhD in the first place. And in my role, I'm the lead epidemiologist. I support my team for different analyses, and I support 3 countries in sub-Saharan Africa for their programming for PEPFAR, for making sure that children and adolescents are prioritized. Since there's a smaller number of the people with HIV, it tends to be a little bit of a battle to make sure that their programming is still prioritized, since they tend to have the biggest gaps. There are a lot of kids that have HIV that are not found, not on treatment. And they tend to have higher rates of interruption in treatment and those kinds of things. So making sure that that stays on country programs' agendas.
Good morning, everyone. Karina Christensen, she, her, and I am a graduate of Health Policy and Management from 2016. I am currently the Deputy Executive Director of the Mayor's Office to Prevent Gun Violence. About a year ago, our Office to Prevent Gun Violence sort of merged and is now really the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety. We sort of merged all of our community-facing anti-violence and empowerment work into one Office of Neighborhood Safety. So technically now I'm the Deputy Executive Director of our Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety with a focus on operations. And I have been in the office for 5 years. I had not done violence prevention work at Hopkins. I really focused on chronic disease prevention. But it was very much with a neighborhood-based or built environment, social equity, health disparities lens. And honestly found myself just not feeling like there was the lens that I was looking for in the kinds of, especially sort of food access or built environment work that was available. And I was looking for something, a field that I could work in, where I could use my skills, where I felt like there was more of a critical historical social equity lens. And so there was, I think 5 years ago, a lot of really exciting work happening in criminal justice reform in New York City, and especially around community-based public health interventions to prevent gun violence specifically. And so I made that transition into the office. I started on the research team, and I was there for a couple of years, and then I made relationships, and I was really in support of our prevention and enforcement teams within the office. And for some context, what our office does, we're in the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, we're a sub-office, and the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice is devoted to advising the mayoral administration on criminal justice reform, safety, fairness, equity, court processes, and we also are a convener, so we can convene multiple agencies, and we also fund. So we have a huge budget, and we're able to implement the administration's priorities, also not just by convening and coordinating the other agencies, but also through the direct work that we fund, like diversion programs, alternatives to incarceration, and our gun violence prevention work in community.
Thank you all. That is, y'all are, it sounds like doing such amazing and also very different work, which I hope we really get into detail. But also curious as to how y'all got into this. Like, what were your paths to find yourself in these very unique positions, distinct positions? And did you know that you wanted to go into government at this level when you came in to do your PhD, especially at Hopkins?
I can answer because it kind of follows through from where I left off. When I thought about this, I wanted to find my the personal essay that you write as part of your application, because I'm certain that I wrote in there very clearly, I want to translate evidence into policy. And before the PhD, I got my MPP from Johns Hopkins. So I was focusing on public policy. I wanted to focus on structural change. but to be in that position where I could understand what the evidence-based said and be in that translation position. And I had that as a concept. And then as I went through the PhD, I felt like a lot of the training was very much around, obviously, the research skill set that you get to be able to execute your own independent research. And I felt myself being pulled more in an academic direction. That was a lot of the mentorship that I was getting. And that was what I saw sort of replicated in terms of what does a newly minted PhD do? Do I get a postdoc? Do I try? I did some applications for postdocs and some applications for even tenure track positions or at research institutes. And I feel incredibly fortunate that the mayor's office research team was growing at the time that I was leaving, because it gave me this foot in the door, and I was able to sort of parlay the skill set that I had in terms of as a mixed methodologist, to be able to get into that office and make that field switch and that transition. And I'm really excited to talk about, like, later as we get into it, the things that you can do in government to translate evidence into policy, because I feel like we have this incredibly influential, powerful space to be able to write the programs. And so we interact with academia all the time, and we have folks that do evaluations for us, and we have folks that try to talk to us and influence how we shape our policies and programs. But ultimately, we're the ones that hold the pen in terms of translating that vision into what the program looks like on the ground. And then we also have oversight for what those programs look like and how they're implemented. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about that a bit, but I always knew that's what I wanted, but I think I found myself drifting in school because I didn't see a lot of that pathway clear before me. So it was actually quite hard by the end of my career to even figure out how I go about doing that. And I did do that first by starting in a research position, whereas now I'm in a policy and an implementation position.
I can also speak to that pretty easily because I did know when I came to Hopkins that I wanted to go into government. And part of that was because I had the experience already. I went to Emory because they had for my master's, because they had a lot of really practical applications that you could do. They had a really good student outbreak response team that I wanted to join and successfully was able to join. So I always really wanted to do this sort of translate immediately into action. It's also why I joined the Commission Corps. I wanted to be able to deploy and respond to public health emergencies. I think I got a little more of that than I wanted with the current situation. But that was really what I wanted to do, is to work on sort of urgent public health needs and high priority things and be able to respond quickly. And academia is not known for their quick response to things. And so I think it was maybe the second year of my PhD was when West Africa Ebola happened. And I had a really hard time sitting in class and doing homework assignments when I knew that if I had stayed at CDC at the master's level, I would be able to be deploying and helping hands-on with that response. And all of my friends that hadn't gotten a PhD, that's what they were doing. They were all going to West Africa and deploying. So it was always very clear to me that that's what I wanted to do. And it is a very different ballgame in the government than in academia. You have a lot more freedom in academia. And so those are sort of the trade-offs, is that you can sort of being able to translate things directly into action, being able to set policy, those kinds of things are more possible in the government, but then there's other things that you give up for that, which I think we're all probably well versed in.
I think that's such a good framing, Marisa, like the kind of freedom versus like, other perks of working in government. So maybe we can dig into that later if you all are interested. But just to go back to your question, I did always see a public health career in government as a possibility. I remember even when I was 16, people would ask, like, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I was like, either I'm going to work for the CDC or I'm going to be an OBGYN. So I'm not an MD. So that one clearly didn't happen. And I also don't work at the CDC, but I do work elsewhere within the same department in government. So, and then kind of more concretely, more recently, when I was starting the PhD, I knew that I either wanted to like stay on as a faculty member at Hopkins, because it's sort of what I knew. I didn't want to go to like a university I didn't know, or I wanted to work in government. And I was also thinking about government prior to starting the PhD. I was like, do I want to try to join government now or go for a PhD? And I really wanted to do the PhD because, it gave me the freedom to focus on something that I really wanted to learn about for a set amount of time. So yeah, I think that was sort of always something in the back of my mind. And I think it got started when, as an undergrad, actually, I was able to do an internship at the NIH, at the Office of Global Research in NIH. So I was always kind of aware of what it was and what it looked like and the type of work that happened and, you know, the perspective, right? You're not necessarily on the ground. You might be sort of facilitating or creating learning agendas or leading a team rather than like being the person who's like analyzing data or treating people or something like that. So I think it was always a possibility for me. And then as far as kind of awareness of it and how I got into my current role, as I was finishing up the PhD, I did apply to, you know, EIS, what Marisa, what you did, and some of the other like fellowship programs that are inroads to government that we can talk about later as well. And I also did a lot of just sleuthing on LinkedIn to see where other graduates of my program had ended up. Like some, of course, ended up in like postdocs and academia, but a lot of folks went to, you know, like leading like internal research at like a hospital or contract research organizations or various parts of government. And that was really interesting to me, just to see like for each of them, like who had what looked like an interesting job to me, like what were their steps in between. So that kind of broadened the possibilities that I kind of had exposure to.
It's really helpful thinking about how you got to where you are. One of the things I think all of you have mentioned is, so what can you do with a PhD in government? Like, what are all the different things that y'all have done, can do? And then also, what are the skills that would be useful to hone in on to be successful?
Well, it really depends. So CDC, there's a huge variety of different roles you can have. So there are people that are pure data roles that work with big data sets and they sit behind a computer and work like churn out sort of these big analyses. And then there's also outbreak response roles. And there's also things like what I do, which is supporting international health programs. And that like these big international health programs that are happening at CDC country offices around the world. So it really depends sort of on what you're looking for, but I'd say regardless of what role you're looking for in the future is get out in the field, get some field experiences, get some hands-on practical application experience, whether it's a summer experience, or if you can build that somehow into your dissertation, that's even better. But make sure to sort of get varied experiences where you have that practical application that will really sort of strengthen your experience for these kinds of jobs, especially if you want to end up like in a health department or anything like that. Like really having some practical experience is really, really important. For EIS, I'd say it's necessary that they wouldn't, if you're only in the lab or if you're only doing data stuff and have had no interaction with sort of humans or done sort of field research or data collection or anything like that, I would really encourage you to do that, because wherever you land, that's going to really ground everything that you're doing and the populations that you're working for.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. When I started in the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice on the research team, maybe half of us either had a PhD or were working on a PhD at the time. And the things that we were doing were the things that you would imagine. So we were monitoring our programs that the office runs, looking at program data, looking at criminal justice data to understand how our programs are being implemented, and doing some work, more like monitoring than evaluation at that point, right? Just how is it being implemented? Who is it reaching? Where is it in operation? And then so we would use that data internally to assess what we're doing. And we would also use that data externally to bring stakeholders together to try to do that coordination across the multiple stakeholders that are involved in any kind of, government intervention. And then we would also contract with research institutes, and we were in the position of sort of managing our longer term evaluations of our programming. So, making sure so we were the funder and we were able to fund evaluations of our programming and sort of try to provide oversight and management, but at the same time, they're doing the work, right? So you're in that other side of the table, which is quite fun, actually, to be on the other side of that table, if that's what you're interested in. And I think that all kind of like is a clear line from a lot of the skill sets that you're developing in class to sitting on that team. I think the other pieces that made it hard to transition from a PhD is precisely what Marisa was just talking about. You're so used to operating independently. If you have a really independent experience at Hopkins, which I did, which is great because it makes you sort of like a superpower that you are able to get stuff done. You are self-driven, you are, take the initiative. But actually I found when I got into the office that I was off just doing work and I was, an absolute workhorse, but it took me a while to figure out and actually learn how to work within a team that was situated within an office that just required a tremendous amount of coordination, a lot of stakeholder engagement. And so some of like the softer skills that I learned from Hopkins or life came in more handy, and especially a lot of the qualitative work that I had done. So like being able to facilitate a meeting, being able to facilitate workshops, being able to like come to name values and make them explicit and like talk through trade-offs, like that kind of work, it was ultimately really important, especially as I moved off of the research team and into our office to prevent gun violence, now our Office of Neighborhood Safety, where we have oversight for the implementation of our community-based programming. And so I think having some experience is a great idea. One thing that I did, which might not be helpful for everybody, but found was very helpful for me, is I think my second year, I reached out to the then, I guess, like food justice coordinator, food coordinator for Baltimore City in the Department of Planning. And I said, I have 5 hours a week. I like barely had 5 hours a week. But I said, I have 5 hours a week, I'll give you for free. If you want to give me a project, I will work on it for 5 hours. And I worked on it in that office from like 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. on Fridays. That was my safe time. That's when I gave it to them. And that gave me the foot in the door. Even though I had a master's of public policy, I'd always worked on a research intervention. And I had project management skills, but I had never worked in government. And that 5 hours a week, I wrote talking points for the mayor. I looked at government, policy documents. I learned a different way of writing that was incredibly helpful for me moving on. I think that the writing skill set is also really important. We can get to that because there's like more to share here. But I think that's, yeah, there's a lot that you can do, and it's like not just your hard skills.
Struggling to find the mute button. You'd think I'd have mastered that in 2 years. But yeah, I agree with everything that's been said, particularly around soft skills. I think the types of degrees all of you are doing are giving you really, really good hard skills and data analysis, understanding the literature, all of that. I think, yeah, the soft skills, working with people, humility, being a really good writer, being a good project manager, being good at just getting things done, aligning things to get things done. Yeah, I think, just being really easy to work with, organized, like all of those kinds of things, I think matters so much once you're out of school and any environment that you're in, which I think many of you know, since so many of you are coming to these degrees with a considerable amount of work and practical and even clinical experience. I think the other thing that I've realized being at where I work at the Office of Planning, Research and Evaluation. There are a lot of folks with PhDs in all different fields. And I guess one thing that I've learned is like, people really do have very different strengths and very different skills that they bring to the table. Like one person I know is extremely good at like catching on to and speaking very, very technical language, and just really intellectually strong, right? Like really able to get new ideas quickly. And that's like a skill that she brings that's just amazing. Another person is just the most thorough person I've ever worked with. And like, that's kind of a skill she brings. So everything that she does is like extremely well thought out, extremely proactive. I think one thing that I do and kind of hope to do more of and be more intentional about is kind of keeping up with the literature, keeping up with dialogues in relevant fields, and like making connections across them and applying those to the work that we're doing in our office. So I think that's something that just kind of comes naturally to me. Like even in my first job out of college, I was like consulting for pharma companies, and I was like keeping up with like what are the drugs that are about to go off patent and like finding those types of news sources. So I feel like there's just like a lot of publicly available information that can be helpful to you if you're the person who kind of like synthesizes it and applies it. So I think that's one thing that I have that's like different from other folks. Project management also like comes really naturally to, or maybe I've just had a lot of experience, I don't know, but I think that's another thing that I kind of bring to the table. So all that is to say is that I think there's a lot of different skills that are valuable, some of which you'll learn from more applied settings, some of which you'll get from school, but even in the same environment doing the same roles, I think people bring different skills to the table. So some of the skills that you bring are going to be like matched to your strengths.
And just to add, sort of again, speaking to the unique environment of government, I would say cultivating, I'd say, patience and sort of not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. Because you're never going to have time again to make everything as perfect as you're going to make it for your dissertation and for the publications that come out of your dissertation. Like you're going to do sensitivity analyses and do all of these things. You're not going to do that again. Your things need to move forward, and the amount of time you're spending on a single project is most likely you're never going to have the time to do that again. So being able to be flexible and adaptable and get things out the door is a good thing to start thinking about and cultivating now as well.
Yeah, something that we ask on all of our job interviews is like, how do you work under pressure? How do you work on a tight timeline? Specifically, what do you do? And one question would be, when you don't know something as a PhD student, I can speak for myself and some folks that I've known, like you want to be the one that figures it out. You want to like go to the books, you want to go to the literature, you want to, like figure it out on your own. And sometimes there's a clock ticking for sure, and people are aware of it, but like you have some of that time and space to do that. You don't have that time and space in a government office to do that. And so part of what I was trying to say earlier is like, having that transition into that space where I was used to working on my own, figure things out, like what I've learned is having the humility to say, I actually don't know what you meant by this. I'm not quite sure what was being asked for here. Is this what you need? This is what I heard you say. Is this what you said? And I think like, that is a sort of cultural transition for me from the PhD space, especially where like feel this you have to be in community, you have to be in communication, and like it's quicker to ask, is this what you meant, than to go off, work really hard on something, bring it back, and it's not usable. So definitely something like a skill set to develop. Yeah. And like you're more trustworthy too.
And not doing it all yourself. If you don't know how to do something, find the person who knows how to do it and have them do it, so that it's sort of people working together. And you can build those skills, but you might not have the time to build it yourself in time for the task that you have to work on. So collaboration is really good, and not having sort of the ego that you have to do it. If you don't know how to do it, get somebody else to do it. Somebody has a question here saying, are you still able to publish and mentor others? Absolutely. I don't know about your guys' jobs, but we publish a lot at CDC. Yeah, I had 7 publications last year. One of them actually was still from my PhD. So 6 CDC related publications last year. So it depends on your role. It depends on what kind of work you're doing, but we publish a lot. And you mentor others as you move up. With your first year, you're probably not going to be doing that unless you're mentoring master's level people on how to get to PhD. But you absolutely have the opportunity to mentor others in lots of different kinds of ways, officially or unofficially, as you move up.
I think on the publishing question, in my office, you can do your own data analysis and publish your own work in the peer-reviewed literature. By and large, we publish government reports rather than publishing in journals, although sometimes we do publish in journals. We can talk about the pros and cons of that, but for the most part, folks in my office are facilitating, reviewing, overseeing those, and their names aren't necessarily listed as authors, but you can be an author if you want to carve out time to do it. One thing that I spend a lot of time doing is thinking about ways to like disseminate research that's not a report, that's not a publication, that's maybe like a short video or maybe like an interactive infographic or something like that. So I have a lot of opportunities to do things like that, which I find really sort of creative and enjoyable. And also it's the results of your research are more likely to get to more people. So that's something I've been thinking a lot about and have sort of a lot of freedom to experiment with that I really like.
Yeah, it's a bit different in my office. There's not very much publishing. I mean, there's a ton of dissemination that goes out. You know, we are publishing internal or, you know, external reports. And again, we do contract for external evaluations. And what that means is that we're in the seat to, so what I will write is I will write the scope of work for another research organization to answer questions. And so like, that's something to think about as well. It's like what you have the ability to do in government is to set the terms of the research and ask the research questions and then give it to another you know, group to be able to do the work and answer it. And for me and what I was looking to do with my career, that I like. You know, if you want to hold the pen and like be the one that's doing the analysis, I would say that in the kind of office that I'm in, which is very much, you know, executive office, we're not an agency, we're a mayoral office. There's less opportunity for publishing, but there's a lot of opportunity to shape knowledge from our office. And one of the ways that we do that again is like via translation of evidence into policy. So like one thing we're able to do is design the programs to be evaluated. So something that, so myself and a colleague who has a PhD in criminology essentially designed the program that I now implement called Atlas. And it's about translating evidence-based models, therapeutic models into voluntary community settings for people who have had escalating or recurrent contact with the justice system. And so we are implementing it in such a way that we actually can do a real evaluation, meaning like a more rigorous evaluation. And so I think that that seat provides you the opportunity to generate knowledge still, even if you're not, you know, authoring papers.
And I think that that's a trade-off depending on where in the government you are. So if you're more on the policy side, you're less likely to be on the publication side. And if you're on the publication side, you're less likely to be on the policy side. So I don't do any policy setting at all, but I do work with data and I do have the opportunity to publish. And then a lot of the jobs where you are shaping what's happening in the world around you, so setting that policy and determining what's actually happening, you're probably less likely to publish. So it depends on what's more important to you. And I'm still sort of more research minded. So I still want to do those research projects and do the data analysis and do the publication process. So that's what I was looking for. But CDC doesn't really set policy. We have almost no powers. We provide guidance. And so doing research and publishing that research is part of that process. Whereas if you go to FDA or something, then you have powers there. So you are setting policy and shaping what's happening and what people are doing.
I'm loving that people have started asking questions because this is exactly where we're going. So Melanie, please.
Thank you. So I'm actually in the DRPH program, not the PhD program. I hope it's okay that I joined. I was wondering, so a lot of the work experience that I have is similar to some of the like combination of soft skills and research that you've described. And I actually was in the federal government for a period of time and then left to get community-based, health center expertise. And I'm in an institute that combines like project management and research and communications. And I'm sort of debating whether as a career I want to go back to the federal government because there are so many things I loved about it, or stay in a community-based organization. And I wonder, even when I've thought about returning to the government, I've had a heck of a time trying to think about how to re-enter. And I wonder if you can speak. So one of you mentioned, going from contractor to federal civil servant, and another entered through the public health service. And I'm just wondering about like pathways into federal work, and even like if networking is even useful, because I feel like generally, I don't know. Yeah, I wonder if you can speak to sort of re-entry or entry in general. And I might just add one last thing, which is that the way I originally got in was as a PMF, which was very streamlined. And Marisa, I had the like exact same trajectory as you. I think you went to Brown. I just looked you up. I went Brown, Emory, CDC, Hopkins, and then I had done the PMF to get into the Office of HIV/AIDS Housing at HUD. So that's where I landed.
Yeah, I was thinking about this, like concrete ways to enter, re-enter. I'm glad you mentioned PMF or Presidential Management Fellows. I think that can be a really good one. The nice thing about that is you can do rotations through different offices and different agencies. And I think that gives you a lot of perspective that once you're kind of in and doing your role is harder to get. So I think that's a really nice way to start. And it also, once you do those rotations, you can, my office has had folks who like did a bunch of rotations and then decided like that this is the office that they want to join. So they were able to kind of make those connections and make a really informed decision when they were taking their job. I think other pathways are literally something called pathways, which you see through usajobs.gov. So like as you are a student, you can apply in, of course, Marisa, CDC's EIS, you have the perfect source for that right here. CDC's Evaluation Fellows is another one. I think they just sent out like a request for applications. Whenever I get these things, I always send them to Anushka to send around Hopkins. And I also send them to the International Health mailing list since they have a jobs mailing list. There's also the AAAS Fellows, which is, also allows like 2-year rotations in different government agencies. So those folks have kind of come through my office as well. And it's a really nice way to get exposure and then, make a really informed decision about where you want to work. Then, yeah, I agree. usajobs.gov is really difficult to navigate. And there are a lot of really like opaque things about the process. There's one, so the NIH's Center for Scientific Review, they put together a really nice webinar that explains some of the nuances of the process. And it's like geared towards folks who are entering the federal government from academia, and they explain the site. So I'm going to drop that link in the chat, but that one's really good. And the Center for Scientific Review, they are like, they review grants that folks submit, and they're like the first line of review for grants. And they look for people who like have PhDs or are former like postdocs or professors to like pull together like the review panels of experts to score the applications. So they and they like hire periodically. So this is them and their ad for recruiting scientific research officers. And here, so now you know the context, and then here's their webinar that I really like. And they, explain some of the things like when you're answering you submit your documents and they have to be formatted in this really specific way that's not necessarily very well explained on the website. And then there's also the questionnaire about your skills that also I think requires some insider knowledge to be able to do well. So they talk about that, which I think was really helpful. I don't know what else other folks who are on the panel. I think Marisa, since we're talking about federal specifically.
Sure, yeah. So getting to CDC, EIS is like slam dunk, absolutely the easiest, or not the easiest, the most impactful way, I think, to get into CDC, because it's this sort of prestigious program. So, and when you come out of it, you're very well positioned to get another job. It's very difficult to get into. I'm happy if people want to contact me independently to talk about it. So it's something that if people want to come to CDC, I encourage you to try for, but certainly not to put all your eggs in that basket, because it takes a lot of people multiple years of applying to get in. For CDC specifically, another sort of easy way to get in is as a contractor. It's really hard to get hired outright as a full-time federal employee as your first position at CDC. So there are also ORISE fellows and Public Health Institute fellows and Public Health Informatics fellows. So there are a lot of different fellowships that you can get into CDC with. PMF is another great one. And otherwise, coming in as a contractor, honestly, it's really hard without any previous experience to just get hired outright as a federal employee.
Yeah, I think state and local government is really different. So I think their networking matters probably a lot more. And, I think most people are pretty open to having informal informational conversations and using LinkedIn to see who your friends' friends are that work in different offices, because it could be really helpful to just understand what's actually happening in that office. at a given time. Like, what is their hiring landscape? Are things coming online soon? Is it worth looking there? But I think it's just far less of a formal process.
But networking is really important either way. So people are usually pretty open to you just reaching out, sort of like a cold email, if there are people you want to work with. And if they don't have anything available, they might be able to recommend you elsewhere. But networking is really, really important, even once you're if you want to move positions. So it's, I would absolutely make those connections if you can.
Is it worth talking a little bit more about the contractor pathway? Maurice, I'm glad you mentioned that. I was a contractor working for a company called BSC, or Business Strategy Consultants. So in that role, like, I had a supervisor who was based at BSC, and my paycheck came from BSC, but I had a desk at ACF OPRE, and that's where, like, I physically went to work every day, and those were the people that I interacted with. So I really did work hand in hand with, almost indistinguishably from OPRE staff. I just had, my paycheck coming from a different place. And there were certain things I couldn't do, like sign invoices on behalf of the government or things like that I could not do. But it was a job posting. I think it just came through like an HBS mailing list or some kind of a Hopkins mailing list. But those kinds of jobs you'll find on like LinkedIn, Monster, Indeed.com, Idealist.com, places like that. And it can, like, you might not initially see like, oh, BSC or Jefferson Solutions or VPD, like that, oh, those are going to be positions in the federal government, but they are. And the way they're written is like that they're supporting a certain office or division within the federal government. So it's kind of nice in that you can, be there, like, really get a good idea of what it would be like to work there before you like go through the process of becoming a civil servant. I can actually show you one of those, what a contractor job posting looks like. My office just had one come out this morning. It's for a budget analyst. So a little bit different than than your all's experiences and interests, but it'll give you an idea of like what a contractor position looks like that, works very sort of hand in hand with people who are civil servants.
Yeah, and we have a ton of contractors at CDC. I started as a contractor after my master's, and it's indistinguishable. So like, we couldn't use the health clinic, and when I wanted to travel, they were the one that got my visa instead of the CDC visa folks. But for them, I sat in the same office as everybody else. I had access to the same computing systems, all of that. And things like emergencies are a really good opportunity actually to get in under a contracting mechanism, because a lot of money gets dropped, sort of emergency hiring money. So contracting positions are the easiest ones to create rather than permanent positions. So there are a lot of contracting positions that are hiring right now at places like CDC because of this congressionally appropriated Haiti money. Haiti was what I got hired under, COVID money, because it's the easiest way to create positions and get physical humans in the seats to do the work. So there are a lot of COVID contracting positions currently right now that you'd be in the Emergency Operations Center, and they are limited. So they might be a contract for a year with the opportunity to renew. It's a lot less stability than getting a postdoc or something like that, but it is an easy way to get your foot in the door.
And at least for me, I don't know how stable or unstable mine was. I was only in it for like a year or two before converting over to a federal civil servant, but there wasn't like an end date for me necessarily. And the salary was very comparable to like the GS scale. So it wasn't, I didn't feel like secondary in any way by being a contractor and not being a federal employee. And I think Kelly Government Solutions is probably one of those companies that like hires and places a lot of contractors. Yeah, and I dropped the link in the chat to the one that my office, the firm through which we seek contract support.
We have about 10 minutes left. Would love to hear from other folks if there are questions. I feel like going into breakout rooms for 10 minutes may be too little bit of a time. Oh, great. Ruth has asked if folks are thinking of still staying in the government.
I am career for sure. Like this is a long-term thing.
Me too. I like that, like, you can go on a detail, which means you can basically go get a whole nother job for 6 months, and stay at your same, level of vacation and pay and benefits and all of that, and, have a job to come back to after that. So I think it's really nice for someone like me who likes to work in a lot of different content areas and wants a career with a lot of different change and different types of roles. So yeah, I think it's a good fit for my personality.
And moving laterally, once you are a permanent federal employee, is really easy. So moving up is sort of the same process that, so like moving up a GS level or whatever is harder. But if you want to move laterally at your same level, it's in CDC particularly, it's really, really easy. If you decide you're bored of the pathogen you're working on and you want to work on something else, it's really easy to move. I mean, you have to apply and everything, but people do it all the time. So you can get a lot of variety over the course of your career.
Yeah, I plan to stay. I've been in for 5 years, and when I think about some of the different organizations that I might move to, they are often organizations that bend with the city. And so it's like moving to an organization that effectively is trying to either implement our work or influence our work. And so then there's a question of, well, what kind of influence would I have outside compared to inside? And I also want to say, having done my master's and PhD at Johns Hopkins, like, we're surrounded by really excellent people from all over, and it's a very, stimulating intellectual environment. And at the mayor's office, I have worked with like the most excellent people I have ever met in my life. Like I think somehow government gets a bad rap in terms of maybe like the why people are there or the whatever. The people that I work with at the mayor's office are brilliant and dedicated, and it's an incredibly rich environment. And so there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of other pieces, like there's trade-offs. But I just also want to give that kind of like plug or shout out to government. Like, there's so many brilliant people working in government offices and government spaces. And so I've done just so much learning being like with colleagues in that role.
You have a fellow NYC government worker, Casey, who is doing a shout out. So that's great. Other questions, folks, to wrap us up?
I can ask.
Melanie have one?
Yeah, if nobody.
Yeah, go for it.
Take the time. I feel like sometimes I have a hard time distinguishing what the most appropriate public health position would be. Like, when you're searching through USA jobs, there are the social science, so for someone in a DRPH program or a PhD who's like got the soft skills, like there's the social science research analyst. There are a million other kinds of analysts, like public health analysts, management analysts, science policy analysts. So lots of analysts. And then there's like public health advisor. There's epidemiologists, which might be like a little more clear in that case. But I think particularly when it comes down to like, should I be applying for like public health advisor positions versus like policy analyst positions or public health policy analyst, like some of that nuance is kind of lost on me, especially coming from HUD, where it was much more just like management operations and not as much of the health side of things. I wonder if to you, when you hear of these roles in HHS, like you have a really clear picture of what the differentiation is between those common descriptions.
I don't know if it's like this everywhere, but at CDC, public health advisors tend to be sort of like budgetary positions and sort of support roles. So they don't do a lot of research. They might support research, but it tends to be, like doing budgets and things like that. So I personally wouldn't, at CDC, want those positions. So I would want a health scientist or an epi position, and I think there's behavioral health scientists and things like that options as well. But I don't know if that's consistent across agencies. So the easiest thing is just to reach out and ask. There will be some contact. It will be like some HR person. And if they're not the right person, you can ask to be put in touch with actually the person hiring, because USA Jobs has very little detail usually on what actually the position will entail. So, and again, at CDC, they are required by law to post those positions for every open slot. They might have already identified somebody for that role and are just required by law to post it externally. So like things you can look out for, if there's only a 1 week turnaround for that position, it probably means they already have somebody identified and not to waste your time applying for it. But it never hurts to reach out and ask and try and get like that FaceTime, try and get a phone call or like reach out via email to the hiring manager, because there's so little information in USA jobs on what the job is. At CDC, you don't even know like what branch you'd be in, just what division usually.
I know for me at ACF, social science research analyst can encompass a lot of different types of roles. So it is really hard to know like exactly what the job description, like what you would actually be doing. One way I think to discern, kind of Marisa, what you're getting at, like, do they have someone in mind for this? Do they not? Like when you see like the hiring manager sending out like a description and like, okay, this job is gonna open up from this time to this time, and they're like giving you material, like giving you kind of a chance to get your materials ready, or like in the NIH one where they're doing this webinar to try to recruit people, like those are all signals that they really are trying to recruit. So those are all sort of good signs that they don't necessarily have someone in mind.
Is that similar in your office as well, Karina? Just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have our designations are like associate. We have analysts and managers in the research unit, and then we have program associates and program directors. I think advisor roles are much more policy roles, like more senior policy roles. So they would be like pretty senior, pretty high level. But yeah, I think it's a bit different. So it's not as structured in the same way, because there is a civil service, but the roles that you have, like, so my actual job title and my civil service title aren't the same at all. Like I think I'm a city research scientist. So I think there's more differentiation and like sort of office culture.
Awesome. Would you all like to say any last thoughts as we wrap up that you would like to share with everyone?
I mean, I think it's important to think about sort of the trade-offs. Again, it's sort of just sort of in the interest of transparency, sort of what some of the negatives are of coming to the government. For me, it was absolutely worth it to be able to have this hands-on work, which is what I enjoy doing. But yeah, again, you have a much stricter hierarchy in terms of people telling you what to do, and you can't really say no. And it depends on your individual boss and your individual supervisor. I actually have quite a lot of freedom in my role, but if my boss tells me to do something, I have to do it. And she just luckily mostly lets me set the agenda for what I'm doing. But very bureaucratic. You have to be very patient. There's a lot of paperwork, and things move slowly in a different way. So when it's a situation that it sort of needs boots on the ground, you can get out there, you can be interacting with people immediately. But then things like publishing have a million more steps. It has to go through government clearance. It's like it's like getting 8 more reviewer number 2s. And you can't say no because the government is putting its stamp on it, and the people that are clearing your products might know nothing about the subject, and it's extremely frustrating. So it's a lot of paperwork, a lot of trainings you have to do all the time to be in compliance with different things. But for me, it's worth it. You just have to be really, I mean, there's a joke that we say is embrace the bureaucracy. You just have to. It's just part of your life. You just have to go with it. And in academia, you have a lot more freedom over what your research questions are, what your topic is. You can put in a grant, and if you get it, you get to go do that. It's really, really different than that. But for me, it's really worth it because I want to be able to like deploy to South Sudan for Ebola, which I did right before COVID happened. I want to be able to do those things.
I guess some of the perks are, you do get annual raises, right? You do kind of like, you have like a long timeline in terms of your job. Like the job title that I have and even the job functions that I have are some that folks have had for decades and retire from. Not saying that that's necessarily what I want to do, but like I do have that option, right? And that's kind of just nice, like flexibility to support your life. Yeah, so I think, and also it is something that I can very much do within 40 hours a week. Like I'm unionized. I've been able to work from home this entire time and not have pressure to come back, you know, sooner than, you know, our union negotiates for us, right? So there are all of those kinds of perks. Like they're really sort of good as an employer, I guess. That's what I would say. So those kinds of perks are very real as well.
Really good benefits.
No, it's good to know these things before you make choices.
Yeah. It's really stable. That also was very attractive to me. My least favorite time, other than sort of the dissertation crunch writing period, was it was a summer. I was TAing the summer epi, the basic epi class. So it was a bunch of people that didn't want to be there that were required to be there, and writing a grant, writing an F award. And I was so miserable. And I was like, well, I really shouldn't be a professor if I hate teaching people that don't want to learn and writing grants. So, because that's the downside of that. So you have a stable paycheck that goes up every couple of years usually. You have really fantastic benefits, and you get a pension at the end. So retirement I had nothing saved for retirement when I graduated from Hopkins. I had never put any money into any kind of retirement account. And so it's a really stable career path for that kind of thing, which I like having. I like knowing that I'm not going to be out of a job if I can't get a grant that year.
And maybe you're like the sort of social safety net for your family, right? So that's something to consider as well. I know that's true for me. Like I don't have a social safety net. Like I am a social safety net, so I need to like make life decisions accordingly. So that factored into my decision.
I think like with local government, you know, there's some things that are different. But I do have to hop off. I'm sure lots of us have a 1 p.m. But I'll put my email if folks have questions that are more specific about local government, and because that's a bit less structured than the federal system, you know, feel free to reach out. And the thing I'll just say about it is, again, like to reiterate what we've all been talking about, like it's really about where you want to have influence, and what you want to do with your day and your time. And, you know, just to like know that there are options for you. You know, sometimes like you'll see a lot of folks going into a particular pathway and it seems like that's what you're trained to do. I did think it would be easier to get the kinds of jobs I was looking at had I just finished with a master's and worked for 5 years instead of getting the PhD for 5 years. Like I found it a bit challenging actually as a new PhD to move into city government, because the PhD jobs typically were like 10 to 15 years of you know, managerial experience, and the other master's level jobs it was just kind of hard to find that right fit. So happy to like talk through and think through how to move into it. But I think at the end of the day, it's like, where do you want to make your influence? And that's it. But thanks to meet you.
Thank you all. Appreciate you so much. I will share out your emails. Appreciate you again. I know it's past time, so thank you so much. Take care.